The night air was cool and calm as Rostova and Ben crouched behind a row of crates in the facility's parking lot. They had been planning this infiltration for weeks, studying the guards' routes and timing, waiting for the perfect moment to slip in undetected. The facility loomed before them, a sprawling complex of concrete and steel that seemed to stretch on forever. "We need to move now," Ben whispered, his eyes fixed on the entrance. Rostova nodded, her hand on the gun holstered at her hip. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline as they set out to gather crucial information about the organization's leadership and plans. They sprinted across the parking lot, keeping low to the ground as they made their way to the side door. Ben produced a set of lockpicks and quickly worked the lock, the sound of the mechanism clicking open seeming loud in the stillness. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a dimly lit corridor lined with pipes and ductwork. The air was thick with the smell of grease and ozone. Rostova consulted the blueprint of the facility on her tablet, her eyes scanning the layout as she oriented herself. "We need to get to the central hub," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's where the main servers are located." Ben nodded, his eyes scanning the corridor. "We'll need to avoid the guards and security cameras." They moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows as they made their way deeper into the facility. The corridors seemed to stretch on forever, lined with doors leading to offices and laboratories. Rostova and Ben dodged and weaved, using their knowledge of the layout to evade detection. As they turned a corner, they stumbled upon a group of guards gathered around a bank of monitors. Rostova and Ben froze, holding their breath as the guards discussed something in hushed tones. "The organization's leadership is planning something big," one of the guards said. "I heard it from a reliable source." Rostova's eyes met Ben's, a spark of excitement igniting between them. This could be the break they needed. They continued on, their senses on high alert as they navigated the treacherous landscape of the facility. The further they delved, the more they realized the organization's reach was more extensive than they thought. "We're in over our heads," Ben said, his voice low and serious. Rostova's jaw set in determination. "We've come too far to turn back now. We need to see this through." As they approached the central hub, the tension grew thicker. Rostova and Ben knew they were getting close to their goal, but they also knew the final showdown was approaching. They steeled themselves for the ultimate challenge, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The central hub loomed before them, a vast chamber filled with rows of servers and mainframes. Rostova and Ben exchanged a look, their hearts pounding in unison. "It's time to get to work," Rostova said, a fierce glint in her eye. Ben nodded, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Let's bring this organization down." With a deep breath, they stepped forward, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The fate of the organization and the future of the world hung in the balance. Rostova and Ben were the only ones standing in the way of the villainous organization's sinister plans. They were getting close, and they would stop at nothing to stop the organization once, and for all completely they moved swiftly through the central hub, their eyes scanning the rows of servers and mainframes. Rostova's fingers flew across her tablet, hacking into the system as Ben stood watch, his gun at the ready. "We need to find the central database," Rostova said, her eyes locked on the screen. "That's where they'll keep the sensitive information." Ben nodded, his eyes scanning the area. "I've got your back." Rostova's fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through the system with ease. She finally accessed the central database, and her eyes widened as she scrolled through the files. "We've got something big here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The organization is planning a massive operation, codenamed Eclipse." Ben's eyes narrowed. "What's the objective?" Rostova's eyes scanned the files, her face growing grim. "They're planning to infiltrate a top-secret government facility and steal classified information." Ben's eyes met Rostova's, a spark of shock igniting between them. "This is bigger than we thought." Rostova's jaw set in determination. "We need to get this information out now." As they worked to download the files, the sound of guards approaching echoed through the corridor. Ben's eyes met Rostova's, a warning sparking between them. "We've got company," he said, his voice low and serious. Rostova's eyes locked on the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked to transfer the files to a secure server. Ben stood watch, his gun at the ready as the guards approached. "We need to move now," Ben said, his eyes fixed on the corridor. Rostova nodded, her eyes locked on the screen. "Almost got it." The files finally transferred, Rostova slammed the tablet shut, and they sprinted out of the central hub, the guards hot on their heels. They weaved through the corridors, dodging and weaving as they made their way back to the side door. As they emerged into the cool night air, Rostova and Ben didn't stop running. They sprinted across the parking lot, the guards closing in. "We need to get out of here now," Ben said, his eyes fixed on the fence. Rostova nodded, her eyes locked on the escape route. "We've got a small window before the guards seal off the area." They reached the fence and scaled it, dropping down on the other side as the guards arrived. Rostova and Ben hit the ground running, not stopping until they reached the safety of their vehicle. As they sped away from the facility, Rostova's eyes locked on the tablet, her mind racing with the implications of what they had discovered. The organization's plans were more sinister than they had ever imagined, and they had stumbled upon a shocking connection to a powerful government official. "We've got a problem," Rostova said, her voice low and serious. "The organization has a mole in the government." Ben's eyes met Rostova's, a spark of shock igniting between them. "Who is it?" Rostova's eyes locked on the screen, her face grim. "Senator Jenkins." Ben's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Rostova's jaw set in determination. "We need to get this information to the right people now." As they sped through the night, Rostova and Ben knew they had stumbled upon something big. The organization's reach was more extensive than they thought, and they had just scratched the surface. They were getting close to the truth, and they would stop at nothing to expose the villainous organization once, and for all completely they quickly got to work, hacking into the mainframe and downloading as much information as they could. The servers hummed and whirred as they worked, the air thick with tension. Rostova's fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes scanning the lines of code as she worked to bypass the security firewalls. Ben stood watch, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of guards or security cameras. He knew they had to move fast before the organization realized what was happening. As they worked, they stumbled upon a shocking connection to a powerful government official. The official's name was linked to several of the organization's key projects, and it seemed they had been secretly funding the organization's activities. "This changes everything," Rostova said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to get this information out to the public." Ben nodded, his face grim. "We'll need to be careful, though. If this official is involved, we can bet they'll do everything in their power to keep it covered up." Rostova's eyes met Ben's, a spark of determination igniting between them. They knew they had to act fast to get the information out before the organization could silence them. As they continued to download information, they heard the sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor. Ben's head snapped up, his eyes locked on the door. "We've got company," he said, his voice low and urgent. Rostova quickly shut down the computer, her heart racing as she turned to face the door. They knew they had to move fast to get out of there before the guards arrived. They sprinted across the room, making a dash for the ventilation shaft they had used to sneak in. Ben climbed up first, his body squeezed into the narrow space as he pulled Rostova up behind him. They moved swiftly through the ductwork, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could hear the guards shouting below, their footsteps echoing through the corridors as they searched for the intruders. Rostova and Ben knew they had to keep moving to get out of the facility before the guards could catch up to them. They crawled through the ductwork, their bodies aching as they squeezed through the narrow spaces. As they moved, they could hear the guards getting closer and closer. Rostova's heart was racing, her senses on high alert as they navigated the treacherous landscape of the facility. "We're almost there," Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little further." Rostova nodded, her eyes fixed on the vent cover ahead. She could see a sliver of light coming from the other side, and she knew they were almost safe. With one final push, they squeezed through the vent cover and dropped down to the ground. They found themselves in a narrow alleyway, the cool night air enveloping them like a shroud. They didn't stop to catch their breath, though. They knew they had to keep moving to get the information they had downloaded to the right people. They sprinted down the alleyway, their hearts still racing from their narrow escape. As they emerged onto the streets, they could see the city stretching out before them. The lights of the skyscrapers twinkled like stars, and the sound of traffic hummed through the air. Rostova and Ben knew they still had a long way to go. They had to get the information out to the public to expose the organization's sinister plans and bring them to justice. But for now, they could finally take a moment to catch their breath. They slowed to a stop, their chests heaving as they looked at each other. They knew they had been through a lot, but they also knew they had each other's backs. "We did it," Ben said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "We got the information we needed." Rostova nodded, her eyes locked on Ben's. "But we're not done yet. We still have to take down the organization." Ben's smile grew wider. "Don't worry, we'll get them. We'll bring them down no matter what it takes." Rostova's face set in determination. Together, they would stop at nothing to bring the villainous organization to its knees. They would fight for justice, no matter the cost. And they would emerge victorious, no matter what dangers lay ahead. The central hub was a maze of cables and wires, the air thick with the hum of machinery. Rostova and Ben moved swiftly, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of guards or security cameras. They knew they had to act fast before they were discovered and the organization's leaders could react. Rostova made her way to the main server, a massive tower of steel and circuitry that dominated the center of the room. She quickly got to work, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the server's mainframe. Ben stood guard, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. He knew they were running out of time and that the organization's leaders would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. As Rostova worked, the screens around her began to flicker and dim. The machinery hummed and whirred, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of burning circuitry. "We're in," Rostova said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've got access to the organization's mainframe." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the door. "We need to move fast. We don't know how long we've got before the guards arrive." Rostova's fingers flew across the keyboard, downloading files and documents at an incredible rate. She was gathering evidence, building a case against the organization and its leaders. As they worked, the room around them began to change. The screens flickered and died, and the machinery fell silent. The air was filled with an eerie stillness, as if the very heart of the organization had been ripped out. "We've got everything we need," Rostova said, her voice filled with triumph. "Let's get out of here." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the door. "We're not out of here yet. We've still got to get past the guards." Rostova smiled, a fierce glint in her eye. "Leave that to me." Together, they made their way back through the corridors, avoiding the guards and security cameras with ease. They moved swiftly, their hearts pounding with excitement and fear. As they emerged into the cool night air, Rostova and Ben felt a sense of relief wash over them. They had done it. They had infiltrated the facility, gathered the evidence they needed, and escaped undetected. But as they made their way back to their safe house, they knew that their work was far from over. They had to analyze the evidence, build a case against the organization and its leaders. They had to bring them to justice, no matter the cost. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Rostova and Ben were ready. They were a team united in their quest for justice, and they would stop at nothing to see it done. As they walked, the city lights twinkling before them, Rostova turned to Ben with a smile. "You know, this is just the beginning." Ben raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile on his face. "What do you mean?" Rostova's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I mean, we've got the evidence we need to bring down the organization, but we've also got something more." Ben's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. "What is it?" Rostova's smile grew wider, a lead on a new case, something big. Ben's eyes locked on hers, a spark of excitement igniting between them. "Tell me more." Rostova's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's a rumor, really, but if it's true, it could change everything." Ben's eyes were filled with a sense of wonder, a sense of possibility. "What is it?" Rostova's smile grew wider, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Let's just say it's something that could bring down not just the organization, but the entire system." Ben's eyes locked on hers, his mind racing with the possibilities. And then, without another word, they disappeared into the night, ready to face whatever lay ahead.